This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett over the K-State Radio Network. We begin today's program with Dr. J. Merriam. He was recently named the 2023 K-State College of Veterinary Medicine Alumni Fellow. Today we discuss his philanthropic projects that focused on the welfare of working equine around the world. We continue today's show with K-State Policy Specialist Jenny Ifft as she provides a brief overview of the Farm Bill and discusses the upcoming K-State Farm Bill panel, which will be taking place at the Stanley Stout Center on May 2nd from 1:30 to 2:45 p.m. We end today's show with K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Johnson County, Dennis Patton. He joins us today to discuss steps homeowners can take to reduce water use in their home landscapes. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are tuning into a conversation now that I was lucky to have several weeks ago with this year's K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine 2023 Alumni Fellow. Dr. J. Merriam has had a career full of advocacy as well as student education, and we're going to tune into that conversation now. His name is Dr. J. Merriam, and he is a grad of what year?
1969.
1969 from here at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. And we're going to talk through your career up to this point today, if that's all right with you, Dr. Merriam?
Yes, indeed. Call me Jay.
Well, that I will do. So, Jay, you have had an incredible career up to this point in your life. It's highly been focused on philanthropic work, and, you know, it's evident your passion for teaching and a lot of the things we'll talk through today as well. But tell us a bit about your career up to this point.
Well, the career up until this point has, you're right, been focused on two things. One, making a living and having fun in veterinary medicine. And the second two-thirds of the career has been focused on philanthropy of working horses, donkeys, and mules throughout the world.
You know, it's clear in all that you've achieved in your career that you have a real passion for equines. So is that really what started your interest in veterinary medicine?
I had a little horse named Dusty down in Bonner Springs, Kansas, that started the whole ride. And yes, I've always loved horses since I was a kid and continued to specialize in horses from the moment I graduated. You achieved your DVM here at Kansas State University, and you went on to continue your studies after that. So why the continuation of those studies? Well, at the time, it was obvious that, A, I wanted to specialize in horses, and B, we didn't get very specialized training in any species. We got training in all species. So I met an instructor here at K-State, Jerry Johnson, who said, you got to come to graduate school. And we're going to get you board certified in surgery, and we're going to get you interested in doing horses the right way. And that's what happened.
And not an easy task to embark on, I'm sure. So what was that experience like?
Well, it was. You're right. I did graduate with the highest debt that K-State had ever had on a vet student, which was $10,000 back in those days, which is nothing compared to what these kids have today. But I worked in what's called the Health Professions Student Loan Program, which meant that if you went to underserved areas, you got 10% off a year up to 50%, which I did. I went to Missouri and Alabama, both of which were considered qualified for that. So, and then I got experience that very few people have in terms of working with people who were top of the line in equine work. So I learned from them.
Following up after that continuation of your studies at Missouri, your internship there, and then Auburn, getting your Master's of Science in Equine Surgery, what was the next step after that for you?
After that, I joined a private practice in Rhode Island that was owned by another Kansas State graduate who had been a few years ahead of me and had always said, gee, when you're done with your graduate work, come work for me, which I did. And we built a surgery facility in New England, one of the first, and started doing a lot of surgery that no one else had been doing. And so we stayed there another 40 years.
I briefly mentioned earlier your work advocating for equine in various capacities, and whether that's serving on boards or starting your own organizations. Tell us a bit about that work.
Actually, the first thing I did when I went to New England was the official practice for the Rhode Island SPCA. And so when there was a problem with horses and SPCA type welfare problems, we got called, and we spent a lot of time. There was very bad economy then. We had an awful lot of very poorly cared for animals. So I learned early on that this was rewarding and needed. And then I began to get into organized veterinary medicine, the state associations, the international associations, and morphed into an understanding of the fact that there are far more working horses, donkeys, and mules in the world than there are in the United States, and that they have needs too. So we started programs in the early 90s that are continuing to this day.
So you mentioned how you got involved in this work with animal welfare specifically for equines, but what inspired your work abroad in this area?
The AAEP, the American Association of Equine Practitioners, asked me, I'd been on their board and been in various committees, to start an equine welfare committee for this international organization, because they had never had one, because all of their work had been focused on show horses and race horses. And so welfare to me meant horses that are doing poorly because they're in a poor situation. And it didn't take long for me to figure out that most of those horses were not in the United States. And it didn't take long to figure out that they weren't poor because they were neglected or mistreated. They were doing poorly because the people had no idea of medicine, proper nutrition, proper training, proper care, and that this was something we, American veterinarians in this case, could have a direct positive influence on. There's 110 million of these working equids, so-called horses, donkeys, and mules, in the third world. And you read through some of the government statistics, 85% of the traction power in Africa is still provided by four-legged animals. That's huge. The pool of these animals, and you go to any one of these countries and you drive by and you see these animals standing on the side of the road, getting ready for whatever job, picking bananas or carrying fish or carrying tourists, and they're skin and bones. And you say, I can do something about that. And we can with education. So that's really how it started. And it's just a target of opportunity, is that these animals exist more in the developing world than they do here. And in the Dominican Republic, when I first saw the animals, the horses down there, I thought I was going to cry, because they were just overworked, underfed, covered with parasites, ticks, and things for which we had easy answers. So it's really pretty easy to get infected with the bug of, I want to help these things. It started when I first worked for the SPCA, both in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, seeing neglected horses. These horses that we deal with now are not neglected. They're overworked and underfed and undercared for. So this is something we can do something about.
Sure. So that lack of resources really is what drove you.
Lack of resources is key to this problem. A lot of big aid organizations want your projects to be sustainable. And that word alone indicates a fantasy. No project, human or animal, can sustain itself on the backs of the people that you're helping. Projects have to have a sustained flow of resources, including education, finances, supplies, and personnel, to sustain what they are supposed to do. So sustainability is a different word than perhaps people think it should be. But even human aid projects are not sustainable because, again, the people that are being helped don't dig themselves out from the earthquake. They don't rebuild a building. Other people do.
Sure. It's hearts like yours that feel for them personally, and they're the ones that go out and make the difference.
It's true. And you have to, but your heart can get in the way. You have to make sure that you're clear-eyed, scientific in this case, or medically oriented to do what you have to do and do it well. We don't sacrifice our standards. It's all top of the line, but we do it and we try to do it with a clear head. And yes, the emotions can get powerful, but what's necessary is clarity.
I know you interact a lot with students today. What does that sort of look like for you now after you've had such an amazing career? Are they asking you the same questions, or what does it usually look like?
They're wondering what on earth I'm talking about for about a minute, and then you can start peeling it back and realize that pathology is pathology is pathology. Diseases are diseases are diseases. You have to follow where they take you. And the students need to learn, and one of them expressed it very well today. He said, I can read it all in the book, but I don't know how to express it clinically. So we had a wonderful discussion about making the transition from reader to healer. And that is a big transition. We are all healers, either now or ultimately. And we can get there if we read, if we follow the scientific process. You will become a healer. It's not magic. The healing touch that veterinarians have, I think, is superior to almost any other profession because our patients can't talk to us. We have to feel them literally with our hands and our fingers and our eyes, our stethoscopes, and find out what's wrong. And you can.
Would you say that's one of the greatest challenges you echo to your students that you talk to today?
Absolutely. We say, gee, we're going to take you to a place to look at sick animals. No laboratories, no equipment, no electricity, no running water, no problem.
You know, I want to congratulate you again because I feel like this is just a huge honor. And probably your first year as a vet student, you would have never imagined this.
This is true.
But I just wanted to say congratulations again.
Thank you so much. I am so proud to be from Kansas State University. Love and revere this place, and we're happy to see the tradition continue.
Well, I think it's fair to say K-State is very proud to have you as an alumni as well. And obviously that is, again, why they named you the 2023 College of Veterinary Medicine Alumni Fellow. So congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
Once again, everyone, that was Dr. J. Merriam. He is the 2023 College of Veterinary Medicine Alumni Fellow named for this year.
We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Jenny Ifft. She is our K-State Extension Policy Specialist, and she's joining us today to talk a bit about understanding the Farm Bill. It's a Farm Bill year, of course, and we're talking about this week specifically because next week, K-State is actually hosting a panel discussion, which will include commentary on the upcoming Farm Bill and will actually be moderated by our own Dean Minton. So if you are interested in attending that listening session, the panel will be taking place on May 2nd at 1:30 p.m. at the Stanley Stout Center. So with all of that being said, Jenny, now that we've kind of teed up our discussion today, let's kind of start with, the basics of what is the Farm Bill?
Well, if you want to go to the official definition, it's an omnibus multi-year law that governs an array of agriculture and food programs.
Now, in layman's term,
exactly.
What does that mean?
Well, first and foremost, it provides a safety net for people that produce food and for people that eat food. It also provides a lot of public goods. The major one is the diverse set of conservation programs run by the USDA. That's 99% of the Farm Bill is under those categories. But there's a lot that goes on under what I call the 1%. Whether it's supporting research and extension that happens at K-State. There's a lot of funding that goes to rural communities. There's the Forestry Service. There's the Farm Service Agency loan programs. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, so significant programs that we're talking about, even in that 1%, which, like you said, is a very small part of this huge bill that we look at every 5 years, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of programs we take for granted that do great work, like the CAMS, the Kansas Ag Mediation Services.
Obviously, this isn't just agriculture that we're talking about here. It's beyond that.
No, the major part of the Farm Bill, and actually we should say the Farm and Food Bill if we want to be really accurate. I think Farm Bill is just easier to say at this point, but you're looking at 80 to 85% of Farm Bill spending is for nutrition programs. So Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, used to be known as food stamps, but that's where the bulk of the spending goes.
When we're thinking about this from, a lot of us listening, we are not legislators ourselves. So when we think about this process, what does that really look like?
First of all, there's a lot of work that goes into making this sort of legislation, whether it's the analysis required to set the budget, whether it's, getting the right legal language or actually writing the legislation, and also the compromises that go into this, different interest groups working together. That's sort of evolved over decades. So usually that the process is going to get started a couple years before the current Farm Bill expires. So legislatures, they'll do formal hearings, testimonies. They'll go out and do listening tours with their constituents, as well as a lot of informal conversations that go on. After you have that process, you're going to have legislation, and typically the House will have their Farm Bill, the Senate will have theirs. They'll be different. They'll have to go to committee and work it out, and then that one has to go back out to each house. And that process can, get done. Sometimes you get a new Farm Bill by the time the current one expires. Sometimes you get a couple extensions. So that process can get, look a little different from Farm Bill to Farm Bill, and it can be quite drawn out.
Sure. So in a perfect world, our Farm Bill, when does it actually end that we're currently under?
It ends this year.
So by the end of the year, if we were in a perfect world, like I said, that would be the goal, would be have the new one kind of up and going.
And we may have an extension, and that's really no immediate cause for concern. That's a pretty typical outcome.
Sure, because like you said, there's a lot of moving parts to this bill. I know we've mentioned that the Farm Bill usually lasts for 5 years, right? But timeline-wise, you've mentioned that extensions are possible. So does that prolong the next Farm Bill that we talk about as well?
So typically they're for 5 years, and they may be extended a couple years, and there's a new one that's typically 5 years. So if it doesn't get extended, the permanent law was made in 1949. And 1949 was pretty different than today. So that gives a real impetus to keep either pass a new Farm Bill or do an extension.
Sure, yeah. So that's the encouragement for our legislators is not wanting to revert back to that 1949 one.
Right.
That makes sense. So when we think about the significance of the Farm Bill for U.S. agriculture specifically, why is it really so important for U.S. ag?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's a funding bill for a lot of big and small programs that are the regular part of doing business in almost all parts of agriculture. So a major change would probably be very disruptive. And first of all, I guess now we're talking farming, is the safety net programs that make payments when yields or income goes down. So you have the federal crop insurance program, the other commodity programs, ARC, PLC, that's agricultural risk coverage, price loss coverage, that make payments when prices or revenue are lower than usual. You also have some disaster programs that are authorized by the Farm Bill. And so you think about the drought we're going on now. So there's been payments made that have helped farms cope with all the losses that they've experienced. It doesn't solve these problems, but it helps businesses get through. The other part is just all the public goods that are being provided. So when we talk about public goods, these are things that potentially benefit everybody or they benefit a large group of people, but they're hard for individuals to provide on their own. So if you think about the conservation programs, lowering erosion, water quality, there's a lot of benefits that aren't just for the people that do it, and that's why there's public funds involved. You think about research and extension, which of course we love here at K-State. There's public funds that support, not totally, but some of the Farm Bill funds provides funding for some of the work that we do as well. Like I said, the Forest Service, forests provide a lot of benefits. Rural communities get a lot of funds from USDA rural development. So there's just a lot of things that happen that rely on the Farm Bill that provide a lot of public benefit.
Yeah, it's funny as you're speaking, a lot of the topics you're talking about, they're things we regularly talk about here on this show. Yeah. So it just goes to show how important this Farm Bill is, not only for Kansas agriculture, but, the agriculture that goes on across our entire country.
Right. And some of the fund even goes to trade facilitation. So developing markets for U.S. agricultural products in other countries, food aid in other countries. So it is really global in that sense.
I feel like this is always a sensitive topic when you're talking about it with others, talking about what's coming up on the upcoming Farm Bill, things like that, because so many people have so many different interests because there really is just so much that's encompassed in it.
Right.
But if the public, feels very passionate about one area or the other and they want to put in their input, how's the best way to do that?
Well, there's not one best way. First of all, the Farm Bill is so big and there's so many compromises involved. I think it's going to be hard to find one person that likes all the Farm Bill. That's the nature of what it is. That's how you get things done. But anyway, individuals can always contact their legislators. And I think every politician I've ever talked to, they love to hear from their constituents. Also, commodity organizations. So if you're a producer, you can contact different commodity organizations that represent you. They definitely have teams that are working with the legislature. if you're interested in nutrition programs, there's also a lot of advocacy groups that are fighting hunger that would play a role in the process.
So there's not just one resource to go to, but there's quite a few various stakeholders in the situation, whether it's directly speaking with the legislator or some of those interest groups like you mentioned too.
Right.
Awesome. Well, Jenny, I know that we mentioned briefly at the beginning, obviously, this panel that will be taking place on May 2nd, again at 1:30 p.m. at the Stanley Stout Center. So with panel discussions like this, what are some themes that you think will probably be talked about?
Well, I'm pretty interested to see what people bring up as well. So in terms of what's going on right now, well, there's some, because we're in the budgeting process. So it's going to get into the weeds here a little bit, but it matters. So the Congressional Budget Office makes a forecast for commodity prices over the next 10 years, and this affects how much budget is allocated to different parts of the Farm Bill. So they're modeling, they're making assumptions, so that's going to probably get brought up somewhere. How much money are we going to have for our farm safety net programs? What assumptions they're making? Somebody's discussing that somewhere. I don't know if it's going to come up with the panel. That's one potential issue that's going on right now, something drought-related, just because of, a lot of the country's out of drought, but western Kansas, it's still, so tough there. So I could think of that coming up in terms of our safety net programs, probably some questions about the nutrition programs. That affects, households could get a couple $100 a month, and it's spread over a lot of households. Most of it goes to families with children or the elderly or disabled. So, a lot of interest in those programs as well. And a lot of SNAP recipients are in rural areas. That's one area. The other thing I could say is just the general overall economy and concerns about the federal deficit. And those do influence the Farm Bill discussion. One thing I would say, just to give a little bit of perspective. So projected spending for the Farm Bill, about $143 billion a year, which that sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But I looked up defense spending and Medicare spending, and they're in the range of $700 billion, $800 billion a year. So it all matters, but the Farm Bill, even with the nutrition programs, which make up the bulk of Farm Bill spending, it's a pretty small share of government spending overall.
Sure. Hate to use the phrase a drop in the bucket, but when we're talking about some of those bigger numbers, it does seem that way in some ways.
It's not a huge share of total federal spending.
Well, thanks, Jenny, so much for all the information you provided today. But our conversation on the Farm Bill, it's not going to end here, right? There's going to be lots of discussion on Ag Today with you in the future.
Yeah, the Farm Bill, again, $143 billion a year in a lot of programs. We really just covered the surface now. So what I'm going to do over the summer is do a weekly series. We're going to start with the history of the Farm Bill, go through the evolution of the Farm Bill, key roles, and get into the structure of the Farm Bill, how it's changed over time. As we get closer to the fall, we'll start switching to current issues in the Farm Bill.
Wonderful. Well, of course, that's going to be insightful information for you all tuning in, so be sure to stay tuned. Again, that's going to be taking place through the summer. But once again, that was K-State Extension Policy Specialist Jenny Ifft joining us for a conversation on understanding the basics of the Farm Bill. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. As drought conditions continue, K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Johnson County, Dennis Patton, says we can reduce water use in the home landscape, but it takes short-term and long-term planning. Dennis, I guess when it comes to landscaping, really the impact that water usage may have, not only impacted by what we plant and what type of lawn we want, but really just even our watering efficiency.
Right. There's a lot of things to consider when it comes to trying to maintain a good lawn or a landscape on less water. So we just need to kind of step back, kind of look at the big picture, because there's issues between, how much rain we get, the distribution of the rain, and then how much water we want to apply to that lawn. And we just need to kind of make decisions on how to manage it from there. Water conservation is year-round, just not when we have a drought, because sometimes if we can plan ahead, put in more drought-tolerant species, plants, have more drought-tolerant kind of practices in place, we don't have to react as much. Our lawns and our plants are prepared and ready to deal with less water.
For someone who's doing a new lawn, they can take these into account, but for someone who has an existing lawn, how do they maybe transition to more of a low-water landscape?
There's several ways to handle that. I think, first of all, just appropriate grass selection itself. Most of the state of Kansas are doing cool season grass varieties such as tall fescue, bluegrass. There are warm season varieties that will tolerate more extreme heat, drought, Bermuda grass, zoysia grass. In some parts of the state, buffalo grass, which is a native grass out in western Kansas, would be all applicable varieties. So we start with a plant that's going to tolerate more dry conditions. I think the other thing we look at is our maintenance. Are we mowing at the correct height? Mowing is probably more than anything else is going to help with handle heat and drought stress. And then we look at how we potentially water or don't water that lawn, and also how we fertilize it or don't fertilize that lawn too, as part of being more drought conscious or water conscious.
I think sometimes the thought is I will just do some light, frequent waterings, and that's one of those things that we should not be doing.
Right. I think the best thing to do with water management on turf is let it stress in the spring. When we have cooler conditions, if you're one that tend to water, hold off watering. Normally we have the cooler days, cooler nights. Yeah, we might not have the rainfall, but if we can hold off on that watering, it kind of thickens up the lawn, it toughens it up, it sends that root system deeper, so we don't want it to really think it's ever going to have a lush capacity of water. Then, as you said, one of the things we want to do, if you are going to water, there's keeping the grass looking golf course green, and then there's keeping the grass alive. And I think as we head more into these water-conscious issues, then I think a lot of us is just going to be watering enough to keep the grass alive. And if you still want some green in it, then, maybe once or twice a week we're going to really deeply soak that lawn to keep the green in it. If we're okay with letting the bluegrass, the tall fescue go dormant, then we may be deep soaking every 2 to 3 weeks just to keep it alive.
We're really looking at that maybe 6 to 8 inch depth?
Correct. And the reason we sometimes say the average lawn or plant needs about an inch or so of water a week is because in our heavy clay soils, that inch soaking of rain or man-made rain, so to speak, will soak that soil to a depth of about 6 inches or so, and that's where the vast majority of the lawn roots are going to be, in that upper 6 to 8 inches. So we can fully hydrate that gets that profile, nice and moist, wet, and it will sustain that grass for another week with usually under pretty good care, keeping some green into it.
And we really want to make sure that we're more or less trickling that water out, not necessarily doing the fire hose effect.
Right. That's a good point, because on most of our soils that are fairly heavy clay, if you really look at it kind of from a technical standpoint, it can only absorb maybe a quarter of an inch of water at most per hour. And so if you apply that water faster than it's going to be soaking into the soil, if you're on any type of slope, you're going to have runoff. And so, yes, we got to be very cautious. If it's running off, it's not soaking into the soil.
And, of course, if people have more information, they can look for extension resources or just talk to their local county or district extension office.
That's correct. And K-State even has a great series on water use publications, anywhere from new lawns, established lawns, to watering new trees, to young trees, to old trees. And so there are some resources out there that give you some tips on how to properly water so you can get the most out of water and be more efficient and use less of it in the landscape.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Johnson County, Dennis Patton. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.